Before we dive into our topic today, I want to address two quick questions that I have gotten from our audience that I think are really worthy of discussion. The first one is something that we've talked about in the past, but I want to drill a little bit deeper in there, and it has to do with positive self talk. And I know we've touched on this briefly before, but the idea of no mind that you share is still so elusive for so many. So, given the choice, this particular member wanted to know, isn't self talk better than the alternative?
Then what
Negative
alternative?
self talk.
But what, just like last time, I mean, I'm not sure if the listener heard the last talk or not, but I think the question is largely, it's a very, um, it's sort of scraping the bottom of the barrel of a question because it's kind of like comparing two irrelevant things and asking which one is less irrelevant. So, I mean, positive self-talk or negative self-talk, or I mean, they're not that different. I mean, so positive self-talk, yeah, it might give you a little uptick in terms of how you feel, but whenever you talk to yourself, uh, put it this way: when you try to convince somebody else of something, the other person feels as if he's being trying to be convinced. Is that right?
And that's my biggest pet peeve with sales. That's a
Yes.
whole nother topic of
And, and,
conversation. But yes,
and so if when you talk to yourself, the fact that you have to talk to yourself, um, yourself, means basically your mind, uh, immediately puts up red flags and says, "Oh, I'm trying to be convinced," and therefore it puts up a brick wall. The same as anyone puts a brick wall up when someone tries to sell them something, right?
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The salesman's talk. So self talk is salesman's talk. It's not real. So the only things that are real are the things that you feel, and the things that are spontaneous and are done as soon as they're done. And then the message comes across loud and clear, whether it's another person or whether it's oneself, that, oh, this person is serious, it's done. So self-talk is very, I mean, these are very low-level concepts. These are very like 101 basic human juvenile kindergarten type things that I'm kind of shocked that people who have spent so many decades of their life trying to ostensibly trying to learn about it, and all they've come to is self-talk, and when they haven't gotten over that little hurdle, it's kind of like you haven't got past your ABCs. So it's kind of silly. I mean, there's a whole there's a whole universe of unexplored truths that no one's even knocking on the door. Everyone's still stuck on this little one little step up to the garage door. That it's juvenile.
Well, it's what modern society and culture really programs everybody to do who subscribes to the whole idea of self help.
Yes, it is. But it's at what you said is absolutely true. What I will say though is that um, whether the people who are programmed became programmed by modern society, or whether they became, even if modern society didn't program them, something else would have. And the reason is because they are to a large degree programmable. And so we are all in many ways conditioned, but it really takes a particular strand of DNA of a human being to to be programmable only to an extent before he naturally stops and says, "Wait a minute, what's going on here?" Um, so I absolutely blame it on society. There's no doubt about it. But then again, society is created by human beings. And so the human beings who create the so-called programming are also the very ones who wish to be programmed. So whether it's the one who was doing the programming or the one who is being programmed, the fact is that the number of people in this world who are neither of those groups is very small. So I can't just blame it all upon just so-called this amorphous, impersonal thing called society.
So let me ask you. Well, let me. That brings up something that I have heard on more than one occasion from people who were super elite achievers in whatever field of endeavor they're in, that when they look at their performance, they think that the last 10 or 20% of their performance often comes from negative emotions, which is their ability to get in touch and almost tolerate their fears. Do you see that?
What do you mean last 10 or 20%?
Kind of like, that last, it's almost kind of like the last, 10% of charging a battery, whether it's with a car or a phone, often takes the longest. So, when you think about golf, for example, since you're involved heavily in golf, the step up from winning a PGA tournament and winning a major tournament is that ability to get in touch with that negative moment that can fuel a different level of ingenuity or performance.
Um, that could be true. I mean, what you're saying is that negativity can light a fire under someone, is what you're saying.
That there's some good to that.
Absolutely. Negative motivation is far more powerful than positive motivation. Being the prospect of losing something is far more powerful than the prospect of gaining something. So loss aversion is more powerful than acquisition, so to speak. That's true. That's true. But it isn't necessarily a strategic thing to where someone says, "Well, I'm here. I better introduce some negative emotion or something negative so that I can climb on that negative step and gain that." And it has to happen organically, right? So, yes, there is absolute truth to that. A lot of the motivation that comes from people who achieve is that during their childhood they were ridiculed, and that is an enormously powerful motivator.
I love this question. It leads me to this question from an individual who sent it in. And it's one that I've contemplated many times, but the reference is obviously one of the themes of the work that you do is freedom.
Yes.
And the question is, this individual's asking, while I listen to the conversations that you have with Kapil, I leave knowing that freedom is what I most want in life. Yet the moment I start to think about it, fear sets in. So am I really, and I'm not really sure why, could it be that I am afraid of freedom? I think
100%.
that's a really good question.
100%. Because everything is a cost. And if something sounds nice to you, and it may be something that you genuinely want, however, the question is not whether you genuinely want it. That isn't the question. The question is, do you genuinely want it at the exclusion of all else?
Mm-hmm.
That you're willing to pay whatever it takes without any idea or any notion that you should, or that it's good for you, or that it's proper, or it's moral, or it's correct, or it's healthy, or it's spiritual. None of that garbage. No. Do you, regardless of what the world says, and with no rules or regulations whatsoever of false morality and all of this nonsense, do you actually want that more than anything else? Now, the person is absolutely right. Freedom actually happens to be something that everybody wants. In fact, freedom happens to be the thing that everybody wants more than anything in their life. It is just that they pursue it by they look for water within a rock. So uh, so because the idea is amorphous, and yet the things that they have in their life are tangible, comparing something amorphous to something tangible becomes frightening because you don't know really what it is. So it really is less about freedom of, and it's more about freedom from. So the question more becomes along the lines of uh, freedom from anxiety, freedom from fear,
Mm-hmm.
freedom from pain, freedom from all of these things, then that becomes much more tangible. That becomes much more understandable, as opposed to, some magical idea of freedom. What does that really mean? So everyone knows what anxiety is on an experiential level. Everyone knows what fear is. Everyone knows what failure is. Everyone knows what pain and confusion and sorrow and sadness. All those things, everyone knows what that is. And because someone knows what that is, if you view freedom as freedom from those things, then it becomes much more tangible and understandable.
You know, I once heard Bruce Springsteen say that to taste freedom, all you need to do is risk being yourself, your true self. And the more that you and I dig deeper into some of these issues, that is the minority of individuals in this world that are willing to take the risk of being themselves.
I don't think there's any risk to anything. I don't think anyone should risk anything. I think it, I think something becomes possible for a human being when he has no choice. If there's a risk, then it isn't worth doing.
Well, the risk of being yourself is also the risk of being unaccepted by other people, the risk of being, ridiculed, and those are the things that I think cause individuals to have fear. Although we're all in pursuit of this level of freedom, is very difficult for people to walk away from something like you said.
Well, I would say that it's much more along the lines of freedom from the fear of losing a job, freedom from the fear of of whatever the situation may be. I don't I don't think that you can I don't think it's practical to give something tangible away in exchange for an idea. It has to be tangible both ways because only then can you compare the value of each tangible thing. So what I disagree with what the idea of what Springsteen said. What I disagree with is, well, all you have to do is this. And whenever there's an all you have to do, no one's going to do it,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
nor should they, because do you know why? Because it's a leap of faith, and leaps of faith, they're not practical. They only exist in books. There's no leap of faith of anything. If you have faith in anything, you're probably going to fall on your face, okay? Because most things aren't worth believing in. They're not true. So there can't be any leap of faith. There can be a leap. There can be a leap towards something that you don't know. There can. But in order for that leap to happen, the circumstance of your present day environment has to be so bad and unacceptable that you are willing to take a leap. And if someone says to you, well, what are you leaping towards? That person will say, I have no idea. All I know is that I am not going to be here anymore. Whatever this is not going to happen anymore. I don't know where I'm going to go, and I'm willing to leap. All I know is that wherever I land, it's not going to be here. So that's desperation, right? It can never be of a sound mind and a conscious decision. Those things are no, those are textbook type things. They're not real, right? It has to be something that's there's a longing or a massive aversion, right? Everything is about the extremes. It is not about the moderation. Everything's about the extremes. It is only the extremes that produce transformation.
So let's talk about industry and let's talk about the truth about industry. And I thought it might be good for us to set some context and maybe frame our conversations around the idea that it's really about entrepreneurs who are building companies, since that's primarily our audience. When do I truly know, as an entrepreneur in whatever industry, that I really do understand the truth about my industry? What does that look like?
Oh, that's it doesn't matter what it looks like. It matters that the question is asked. See, it's like jumping into a river. When you jump into a river, the flow takes you, and when the flow takes you, you you are moving so fast that you are trying to avoid the rocks that come in your way. You are worrying about the waterfall that may come at any time, right? You're worried about the branches that stick into the river from the bank so that you don't get cut. So everyone is so lost because because the flow is so powerful and so pervasive and so all encompassing that Everyone gets lost in the putting out of the fire, such as avoiding the rock, avoiding the branch, looking out for the waterfall, whatever it may be. Uh, and so there is so much to do, there is so much going on that the assumption is already made that the questions that are already stated when the person comes into that industry are the questions that he begins to ask. He never asks, wait a minute, are the questions that are being asked even relevant? That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen. It's always, okay, so I'm going to jump in here. You guys are playing this game, so let me try to compete and play it too. How do I get better at this game?
Mm-hmm.
So immediately one begins to try to get better at the game that's already going on, as opposed to asking, wait a minute, why, I don't want to get better at this game. Why is this game here, and who are the opponents, and why did they start? No one does that. No one does that. They jump into the river and they get taken by the flow. So it has nothing to do. That's a 40-year later question that you just asked. How do I know when I've arrived at what the truth about the industry is? That's way down, downstream. The first thing is who's asking the question to say, wait a minute, who's forget. I mean, even more fundamental than saying what games are you playing, even more fundamental than that, and this is where almost nobody goes, is well, what industry am I really in? No one asks that, right? So there are questions that are so ridiculous that no one will even pose them out loud because they know that they'll get smacked down so quickly before they even arrive at the last word of their sentence. Because what do you mean? What industry you're in? I mean, what are you, you don't know anything. You don't even know what industry you're in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me tell you right now, there may be three people who know what industry they're in. No one knows what industry they're in. They just know the industry. They just know the industry that has been created in that name. They don't know what actually it's about. They don't know what the fundament of the fundament is. And if they did, they would not join the games. And in not joining the games, they would ask fundamentally different questions, which would take them on different tangents and avoid all the mud wrestling.
So tell me, what state of mind does it take for me to at least start to recognize that I don't want to go down that river?
Well, there's no state of mind. It's either that comes within you or it doesn't, right? Or someone brings that to your, if it doesn't come within you, someone brings that to your attention, or they don't. So if it naturally comes within you, then you will be elite. If it doesn't come within you and no one brings that to your attention, then you're sunk.
So you work with leaders who are outliers and innovators in their respective industries. Do you find their approach to thinking about their industry different than most of the other people out there?
Generally, yes. Generally, yes. A lot of times, it's also that they, I would say, more succinctly, that uh, the DNA for that is there. The sensitivity and the receptivity of that is there. The seeds of that are there. And in most cases, those seeds have already been planted and blossomed. But a lot of times they've forgotten about those seeds because they've lived in this environment for so long in which the only loudspeaker voice they hear is that of society and of their own industry, that you kind of by osmosis begin to fall for those traps because it's all you hear. It's kind of like brainwashing in Gitmo, right? They hang you upside down and they put speakers in your. I don't know if they do it or not, but that's what you hear, right? And you hear about prisoners of war, getting, put loud speakers in their ears, saying the same things over and over again of that they want them to hear. It's the same thing, right? Everything's Gitmo. Wherever you look, this is all terrorism. Wherever we go, it's all this is all one mass conditioning. There's no difference. Um, so so then they tend to forget that they're not of this ilk. Um, but yes, I mean it turns out. I mean, I guess it's self-selecting in a way because of who I choose. But the people who I work with are they have that seed. Either it's in some it's blossomed, in some it's not, but that receptivity is always there.
And since most of them are leaders, does that does that receptivity and does that level of thinking, Kapil, translate to everybody else in the organization? So are they shifting the entire ship in the direction that they want to go?
No, I think it's more about them and the steering of the ship really has to be done by the top, and not by top committees, but by top individuals. So I don't. I think it's a very impractical thing to say that that needs to be fed into all of the entire company, because that's very impractical. You're not going to feed this type of DNA into non-DNA people. You're just not. So you steer the ship according to what you think is in line with your uncompromising vision, and everyone else sort of rides the ship. But this democratic, this need or effort to try to explain to others so that you'll get blank looks. There isn't enough time in a lifetime to do that, and even if there was, it still wouldn't do you any good.
So let me ask you about one particular industry. Let's assume you or somebody that you work with very closely is in at the real upper echelon of finance. And that's an industry that is as traditional and as conventional as you come. How do you approach thinking unconventionally about that business?
Well, it's irrelevant what business it is. I mean, the questions are always the same. The question is, whatever the prevailing beliefs are they true? And what is the evidence that they are true? And and have these questions really been asked or not?
Well, most of the time they think they're true, right? And isn't it because they're providing surface answers to themselves, and it's really all they know. Like if I go and talk to some of the people that I know in finance and ask them the same question, the likelihood that I'm going to get a similar answer is very high.
Well, but why is that?
Because that's all they know, and it has succeeded for them. It's served them well for whatever.
I would say it's probably 80% that's all they know,
Mm-hmm.
and the remaining 20% is because they don't have that DNA.
And do you think you can acquire that DNA?
I think it is a massive. I think it is a. I think it's massively misleading and frankly incorrect to assume that the the majority of people, right, who have been conditioned according to the prevailing dogma of their industry, that if they were brought into a room and they were told the truth, that they would suddenly have all that this amazing epiphany, and they would say thank you, and they would say, I'm so glad I now know the truth. That just isn't going to happen. Now, might there be one or maybe two in the entire? Yes, yes, but that's why I say it isn't just about the fact that it's all they know. It is the fact that even if they did know, it's they would have to have a certain fortified foundation in order to be able to carry that truth. And most just don't. They just don't. I'm not here to make things sound nice, Mo. I mean, what am I going to say to you? They just don't. The number of people. I mean, look at Twitter. I mean, just look at the comments that I receive from people, right?
Yeah.
I mean, look at the comments. Not just me. Not just me. Look at the comment everyone receives, right? I mean, most of them are very unintelligent comments, and most of the comments are that the tweet hasn't even. You can clearly tell that the person who responded didn't even fully read the tweet. That as soon as there was a word that triggered them, that they immediately stopped reading it and then responded because it went against their belief. Now, I don't think anyone should agree or disagree. And I don't think that that's wrong what they did or right what they did. I'm simply making an observation with no expectation of any change in behavior, right? I'm just making an observation that this is the way the vast majority of human beings are. No, so the idea that you keep implying that if only they knew the truth, Mo, you don't even want to know the truth. Nobody wants to know the truth. It's just it's just the case. That's just the way things are. And it doesn't matter it doesn't matter that someone should be told that they should want to know the truth. It's just the way it is. The Pacific Ocean is blue, the sun rises in the east, and nobody wants to know the truth. And there's no wrong or right about that. There's no outrage. It just is the way it is.
Mm-hmm. And how about the DNA? The 20% that you were talking about, that have the DNA to be outliers in their industry.
Yeah.
Can the rest of the people out there who are not part of that 20%
But let me
capture
ask
some of
you,
that magic?
why do you ask this question? Like, why do you care? Why? Okay, here, I'm not interested in asking if the masses can be raised two notches, right?
We're not talking about the masses. Maybe we talk about, say,
No, no,
21% instead of
no,
20.
no, I'm not, no, I said the 20% that remained in all the people who were not going to get it, the 20% that remained as to why they did not get it. Not that 20%
Mm-hmm.
of the
Mm-hmm.
population is like,
Right. I'm with you. I'm with you.
so what I'm saying is I'm not really interested in raising the masses by two notches. I mean, why? It doesn't make any sense. It is a far more promising and more productive and more transformational thing to raise the people who are at level 8, raise them to 10. Okay? Because them getting to 10 will automatically lift the others
Mm-hmm.
just by them getting to 10. So it isn't about working at the bottom. I mean, the lowest common denominator philosophy is ridiculous, and that's what goes on in the schools and businesses. Everyone's the lowest common denominator. Why would you start there? Who cares? Let's work with the people who are at the top and make them 110%.
So, when you think about captains of industry, who do you think about?
um, I don't think of captains of industry. I'm not saying that there aren't amazing, rare DNA people out there because there are. I just haven't met all the captains of industry to to be able to evaluate for myself.
So, what's often missing between the people who are at 8 and what does it take for them to get to that 10 or even to a 9?
Yeah, good question. Uh, Permission.
A lot of people highlight that in our talks or in our conversations as huge insights for them. Dive into that a little bit. What do you mean permission? Permission for what? Permission to get to that level?
The people who are at eights and nines, Mo, tend to have an inkling that everything's full of crap, but something inside them says, but maybe it's not. And could things really be that off base? Maybe I'm overdoing it, right? When they're given the permission to say, you know what, all the doubts that you're having are 100% true, immediately the tether which keeps them tied to the earth snaps.
And when that happens, do you think that level of authenticity or vulnerability allows them to access whatever is left to be able to elevate to that level?
I think that I think that if someone gives themselves the permission, absolutely. But if I may be honest, I think for the most of the people who were at the eights and the nines, if they were going to give themselves permission, they would have already done it by now. And and so you know, raising you know raising their voice against the background noise, higher than the background noise, is a very it's a very uh, challenging and difficult concept or
Mm-hmm.
prospect. And so it tends to be someone else who gives them the permission. Um, and that's the way it oftentimes works. I mean, not always, not always. I mean, there are some who absolutely will give themselves permission, 100%. But then there are many others who, really, I mean, when you live in the ocean and all the waves say the same thing, right? And you're the only wave who is saying not only a little bit off, but like the moon
Mm-hmm.
compared to
Mm-hmm.
anything else, then there tends to be a need for permission to say, you know what? Yeah, actually, it's true. Everyone is wrong. Every wave, every wave in the ocean actually is absolutely way off base. You're the only one.
And who is that person that takes him to that level? Is it a coach,
It can be um, the number of
a
people,
partner?
the number of people who exist to be able to give them that permission is two and a half. Right? I mean,
Oh, we've
we're
gone from
talking
five to
such
three to two and
small.
a half now,
Well,
right?
well, yeah, the five who exist who need the permission, and there's probably two and a half who can actually give it, right? The world over. I mean, we're talking such small numbers. It the rarity of human beings with rare DNA is um, is not is way overstated. You know what I mean? It isn't understood just how rare it is in this world.
Mm-hmm. When was the last time you gave somebody that permission?
Oh, very, very, very often.
And what do you see? What happens? There's something that typically happens that you see when that light goes on.
Yeah, there's a sense of absolute freedom when that happens because the person generally suspected it all along, but all they kept hearing was the complete opposite, which is that they're crazy and they don't know what they're doing. And they're, and they knew it. They knew something was massively off. It's a DNA thing.
Mm. And at that point, do you just start to see a change in behavior when you're working with them, or what happens after you start to see that permission take hold?
I don't really know. I mean, I don't.
Do the conversations that you guys have change
Yeah, yeah. The questions change. Yes, yes.
because the stakes get higher, or what?
No, because the now all the stops can be pulled out because they were kind of put on layaway for so many years.
Yeah, well, this is a fascinating conversation because all of us, with the exception of the two and a half and yourself, have doubts, right? Have doubts about our capabilities, have doubts about our ability, and doubt
Sure,
sets in,
sure, sure. Yes, yes.
right?
Yeah.
And we want to give ourselves that permission, right? We want to be able to have someone else give us that permission. But for whatever damn reason, we don't. Is it
Well, what are you going to give yourself permission to do?
permission to start to move towards that level of freedom that we're talking about?
Well, the permission that I'm talking about isn't the permission that I'm talking about is the validation and the confirmation that the the suspicions that everything when everybody was wrong were true.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm talking about. That's the permission I'm talking about. So if someone doesn't already have that, then there's no permission needed. Then it's a prescription that you should move towards freedom or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that has to be, so someone needs, something already has to be there that needs permission so that it can leave the earth.
It's permission to say, hey, get away. It's almost that immunity from what other people think of me, or what my industry thinks of me, that leads me to ultimately become, unreasonably successful
Mhm.
within that context.
Right. That's a huge thing. Yeah. Not caring what others think of you is a massive milestone.
Yeah, that's a real
You
difficult
can, and
thing.
you can't, and you can't prescribe your way there.
Yeah. What did it take? When did you know you were there? Because I know you are.
I think it comes down to what are the consequences of not being there, and then seeing if those consequences are acceptable to you or not, without any sense of should or shouldn't. And so for me, it's not okay. Like for me, it's simply not okay that what everyone thinks of me, is uh, something that I need to juggle and change and manage and modify.
Are you at a point in life where you're totally immune to the outside noise?
I haven't examined that question. I think it's a wonderful question. I haven't really asked that question if I am or am I not. But I will say that uh, yeah, for me to give you an honest answer, I have to truly examine. But it's a fairly good way there.
Yeah, you're definitely there. Okay, my last question to you has to do with the scope of entrepreneurship that's going on in the world. It seems like, at least in the valley and in other places in tech, that in order to create something really breakthrough, you have to do what no one else is doing. And, people approach that by coming up with moonshots and so forth. If you were working with a group of entrepreneurs who wanted to start businesses with the thought process like that, how would you help them think?
I would um, have them approach the matter from the standpoint of what will give them ultimate satisfaction, as opposed to what will give them pleasure.
And what does ultimate satisfaction look like? Is that personal for each of us and or collectively as company builders?
Absolutely, well, it's for each person, each individual person, what satisfaction looks like for them. I think it really comes down to getting away from chases and uh, with with clarity and wisdom and calmness and serenity to examine why one is in the business that they're in, what business they actually are in, that they didn't know that they were in, and um, to move away from anything that is done in a reactive fashion that will only lead to a chase, such as being better than another person, right? So none of these things have to do with being are wrong or right. It's not wrong to want to be better than anyone. Nothing is wrong. There are no rules. There's no morality. There's nothing. Okay? There's just nothing. So what what is truth is when I arrive at this place, which place do I have to arrive that will no longer cause me to chase? And that isn't wrong either. It is just that if you no longer have to chase, then you don't spin your wheels. Then you're not constantly thirsty and hungry.
Which also means you don't really give a damn about your competition, right? That I know in your eyes they don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if you compete, um, then you haven't really found anything that's worthy because you haven't arrived at something that is um, truly otherworldly. You're just one more of the same, perhaps a little bit better or a little bit cheaper.
So
And
this,
that once again, it's personal, Mo. So to me, that's boring, right? To play the to play the did I lose by an inch or win by an inch game? To me, that's boring. Now, no one needs to take my view. That's for me, right? So I would never tell someone else, you know, why would you do that? That's boring because it may not be for them. It may not be boring for them.
Mhm.
I still think it's leaving a massive amount on the table. That's true, but one must approach things according to the way that he feels and what moves him. and what inspires him.
Does that go the same thing for athletes or golfers?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, athletes don't really. The athletes are just like the executives and the CEO. They're all the same. They're all the same. No one really asks where it is that they want to go.
They want to win tournaments and championships,
Well, that's
right? Don't we?
no, that's too vague. That's too vague. You have to find out what the ultimate destination is, and it may be that winning tournaments is a part of the avenue which takes you to that destination. But just winning a tournament or not, that's boring. That means that you're rolling the dice every single week. What's the ultimate vision?
To be the best in the world? Is that
That's
what
okay,
is that
that's
what we're
fine.
talking about?
Sure, it would be the best in the world. That's more tangible, right? Um, that it something the destination has to be clearly spelled out. I was talking to a tour caddy, at a pretty big PGA Tour event, and I said, it was a rain delay, and we were sitting there talking, and I said, listen, because he was having trouble with his player, and he said, listen, you need to go ask him, who do you want to be? And he looked at me and he said, Doc, listen, if I asked that question to my player, he'd fire me.
Yeah.
Okay. And he said, if you ask anyone in this room, any of the tour players in this room, that question, first of all, they wouldn't know how to answer it. They've never asked that question. No one's ever told them to ask that question. And they probably fire you for asking it, right? I can't ask my guy that question. You see? So no one, the number of people who are truly exceptional, even on the PGA Tour or the NBA or in Silicon Valley or wherever you want, is is minute, Mo, minute. It's a fraction of a fraction of a fraction.
So let me ask you, for the three that are serious, how do we start to contemplate that question? How do we start to really explore this whole idea of what do we want? So you're convincing me that most of us think we know what we want, but we really don't.
People don't know what they want because they never really ask the question. And the reason that they never really ask the question is because they're too busy chasing.
So I'm trying to think about that.
So,
Chasing
so,
goals,
so
chasing what?
whatever, chasing whatever the flow of the stream is. I mean, in order to ask a question, you need to have space. You need to have time away and a mental sort of time out from the flow of the river,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can actually ask that question. No one really uh, no one really has that time or gives themselves that time because they're too busy. The next meeting, the next email, the next phone call, the next business lunch, the next lanyard wearing conference, right? The next the next employee to hire. There's a line of 796 fires that need to be put out, right? There's no time and space to free of those fires to be able to ask that question. And even if there were, then that time and space would be used for vacation. So all the time in a person's life is spoken for. It's allotted.
Fascinating stuff, man. I guess we can hit pause on this session and pick it up next time. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.